Are you ready to learn the shocking truth about the luxurious mansions of Victorian England? The very truth that classic novels prefer to keep quiet about, and that you'll never see in those beautiful historical TV series. Behind the dazzling facade of incredible wealth, lavish balls, and impeccable manners lay a vast, sometimes ruthless machine, and it operated solely at the expense of those whom high society chose to ignore completely. Imagine this: a young girl stepping through the threshold of this enormous, intimidating house for the first time was forever stripped of her past in that very moment. She became nothing more than a faceless cog in this gigantic, closed system. Her grey daily life consisted of endless, exhausting labour from dawn to dusk, the strictest rules, and complete subservience to the needs and whims of her influential masters. And believe me, what you're about to hear will make you look at the era of beautiful dresses and top hats in a completely different light. Be sure to watch this video all the way through, because in the second half of the clip, I'll reveal the darkest secret, exactly how that illusion of perfect cleanliness was created in these massive mansions, and what a truly terrible price the invisible maids paid for it every single day. Spoiler: reality was far harsher than any fantasy. So brew some tea, give it a like in advance, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new historical investigations. And here we go. What if I told you that everything you believed is a lie? The luxurious life of the Victorian aristocracy was sustained by a vast army of silent and completely invisible workers. The arrival of a new maid at a wealthy home always took place very early in the morning or late at night. The girl entered exclusively through the back door so as not to be seen by the masters or their important guests. From that moment on, the front doors were closed to her, and a completely different life began. In the spacious servants' hall, she was met by a stern housekeeper who immediately assessed the new worker's appearance. The girl was given a uniform consisting of a simple dark dress, a thick white apron, and the obligatory bonnet. Her own modest belongings were carefully packed away and stored in a far corner of the cramped attic. The new maid's name was often changed to one more familiar to the employers, so they wouldn't have to memorize new names. In this way, her individuality was erased, giving way to strict functionality and absolute obedience to the house rules. The architecture of the Victorian mansion was specifically designed so that the paths of the masters and servants crossed as infrequently as possible. Narrow, dark corridors ran through the house, hidden behind the thick walls of luxurious living rooms and grand dining rooms. These hidden passageways allowed the staff to move between floors completely silently and unnoticed by the noble residents. A maid had to know every turn of this complex labyrinth so she could be in the right place at any moment. Such a layout transformed the enormous house into two completely different worlds existing in parallel. The first few days in her new surroundings were a real test of the young girl's memory and endurance. She had to memorize hundreds of minor rules regarding cleaning, serving, and the proper way to open doors. The strict daily schedule left not a single free minute for rest or simple reflection. Any deviation from the established schedule was strictly punished with a reprimand or the loss of part of her meager salary. This harsh rhythm gradually turned a person into a flawlessly functioning mechanism that knew no fatigue. One of the new employee's main duties was to maintain perfect cleanliness in the area entrusted to her. She had to spend hours rubbing the wooden floors with special polishes until they shone like a mirror. The heavy oak panels required daily polishing with soft flannel cloths so that not a speck of dust remained on them. The huge windows were washed using water and old newspapers, which gave the glass an incredible clarity. All this colossal labor remained completely invisible to the owners, who took cleanliness for granted. No less difficult was the task of caring for the countless decorative items adorning the reception rooms. Porcelain figurines, heavy bronze clocks, and crystal vases required the utmost care and attention. A maid was not allowed to break or damage even the most insignificant detail of the expensive interior. A single awkward movement could cost her not only her job, but also her reputation as a reliable employee. Therefore, cleaning the living room turned into a veritable dance, where every movement was measured down to the millimeter. Interaction with other members of the staff was also subject to strict unspoken rules and a clear hierarchy. The junior maid occupied the lowest rung of this complex social ladder within the domestic world. She was obliged to unquestioningly carry out the orders of the senior maids, the cook, and the all-powerful housekeeper. Any disputes or displays of discontent were nipped in the bud, creating an atmosphere of absolute obedience. Only after many years of impeccable service could a young woman hope to raise her status. The servants' meals were strikingly different from the abundance served daily at the master's table. The diet consisted of simple, hearty dishes such as oatmeal, thick soups, and inexpensive cuts of meat. Meals took place in a special room for servants, where strict silence and impeccable order reigned. At the table, the same rigid hierarchy was observed, determining the order in which dishes were served and the seating arrangement of the workers. Food was viewed solely as fuel necessary to sustain strength before a long workday. Surprisingly, even under such harsh conditions, the girls found small joys in their rare interactions with one another. In the evenings, while mending linens, they quietly discussed the events of the past day and shared news. These brief moments of togetherness helped them keep their sanity and not lose heart under the weight of their daily duties. Solidarity among the workers became a reliable support in the vast and completely foreign house. However, such conversations were always held in hushed tones so as not to disturb the rest of the masters upstairs. The realization of her invisibility and insignificance became the main psychological ordeal for the new maid. She was constantly surrounded by beautiful things and wealthy people, but she was never part of that world. Her presence was tolerated only as long as she flawlessly performed all her numerous duties. It would be very interesting to hear your perspective on this hidden side of history. Where are you from? Do you agree with the arguments presented? And be sure to subscribe to our channel. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the ruthless morning schedule of Victorian maids. A junior maid's day began at exactly 4:30 in the morning, long before the first masters of the house woke up. The attic room was incredibly cold, as the fireplaces there were never lit. The girl had to get dressed quickly in the dark, fumbling for buttons with her frozen fingers. She had to descend the narrow, creaking stairs by the dim light of a single candle. Her first and most important task was to light the fires in the numerous fireplaces of the enormous mansion. Every morning, the maid had to clean out the ashes left over from the previous evening without stirring up dust. Then she would stack dry firewood, paper, and coal, kindling the flames in the cold living rooms and bedrooms. She had to carry heavy buckets of coal from the basement up to the upper floors via endless steep flights of stairs. The work was dirty, leaving ingrained black soot on her hands and face. Once the fireplaces were burning, it was time to prepare the rooms for the master's awakening. The girl silently opened the heavy curtains, letting the first light of morning into the rooms. She dusted the polished furniture, taking care not to move a single item from its proper place. The damp cloths quickly became soiled, and she had to constantly rinse them in icy water. The entire process had to be completed before the masters opened their eyes. Meanwhile, the kitchen was already bustling with activity as they prepared a hearty English breakfast. The junior maid helped peel vegetables, wash dishes, and prepare trays for serving meals in the rooms. The enormous copper pots required constant scrubbing with fine sand until they gleamed with a dazzling golden sheen. The heat from the kitchen stove mingled with the cold draft sweeping across the stone floor of the lower level. They had to work quickly and in unison, allowing not the slightest delay. Special attention was required when preparing hot water for the noble residents' morning ablutions. Large copper jugs were filled with boiling water from the kitchen kettle and hurriedly carried to all the bedrooms. Carrying a full pitcher up the stairs required the utmost care so as not to spill a single drop on the expensive carpets. The water cooled quickly, so the maid had to make numerous rapid trips up and down. This demanded tremendous stamina and incredible concentration. After the masters had washed, it was time to tidy the bedrooms and bring their personal belongings into perfect order. The beds were carefully made with fresh linens, and the down comforters were fluffed to perfect fluffiness. Nightgowns were neatly folded and stored in spacious mahogany wardrobes. Night vases had to be removed as discreetly as possible, carefully washed with special alkaline solutions. Only a light scent of freshness and expensive perfume was to remain in the rooms. The master's breakfast meant a brief respite for the servants, during which they could tidy themselves up. The maids washed the coal dust from their hands and changed into clean white aprons for the day's work. A servant's appearance had to be impeccable, without a single stain or crease in the fabric. Hair was pulled tightly under a bonnet so that not a single strand would stick out. The austere appearance served as a symbol of discipline and the high status of the mansion itself. By 8 o'clock in the morning, most of the heavy work had already been done, but the day was just beginning. Ahead of her lay endless tasks, cleaning the silverware and preparing the house for evening receptions. She was not allowed to sit down or stop for even a moment, constantly on the move. Every action was monitored by senior staff, ready to point out the slightest mistake. The morning shift set the pace for the entire long and exhausting workday. Only during rare moments of calm could the maid allow herself a quick breakfast in the kitchen. The food was eaten quickly, without unnecessary conversation, under the strict gaze of the head cook. A mug of hot tea and a piece of bread restored a little strength to her weary body. The ringing of a bell from the living room could interrupt this brief respite at any moment. The girl had to immediately drop everything and rush to answer her employer's call. The rhythm of this early morning repeated day after day, year after year, with no days off or holidays. The habit of waking up in the dark and immediately getting to work became second nature. Do you think a modern person could endure such a grueling daily schedule? In the next chapter, you'll learn a secret that will change your life and your attitude toward daily work. Would you like to learn the secret that will change your life and demonstrate the true mastery of domestic service? In Victorian England, the ideal servant was one who was completely invisible and inaudible. This rule required the young women to develop special skills for moving silently through the vast house. They learnt to walk with a special gliding step, keeping their heels on the floor so as not to create any squeaking. Doors were opened and closed with incredible care, without a single sound from the hinges. Cleaning in the presence of the masters was strictly forbidden by the rules of etiquette of the time. If a maid noticed a master approaching, she had to immediately disappear from his sight. To do this, they used those very hidden corridors and narrow alcoves behind the curtains. Becoming invisible on command was one of the most important skills for a young maid. The owners preferred to think that order in the house appeared as if by magic, all on its own. Even the process of dusting turned into a true art of caution and delicacy. The girls used soft feather dusters that made no sound when they touched the wood. They worked with their backs to the wall, so they could always quickly retreat toward the exit. It was forbidden to drag chairs across the floor. They had to be carefully lifted and carried. Silence in the house was valued above all else, and breaking it was punished with an immediate fine. One of the most remarkable skills was the ability to erase one's own footprints. After washing the floors in the long hallway, the maid had to walk backward, wiping the floor with a dry cloth. In this way, not a single footprint from anyone else's shoes remained on the gleaming surface. The work was performed with such meticulousness that it seemed as though no one had ever entered the room at all. This created the illusion of absolute pristine space, so beloved by Victorian aristocrats. Stoking the fire during the day also required special skills of stealth. If the fire died down, the maid had to add wood so that the hosts would not be distracted from their reading. She would crawl on her knees toward the fireplace, trying not to let the fabric of her dress brush against the metal grate. The coal tongs were wrapped in soft cloth to prevent the loud clanging of iron. The warmth appeared in the room imperceptibly, as if by itself. Interaction with the hosts was kept to an absolute minimum, consisting of short, memorized phrases. The maid was not allowed to initiate conversation or ask questions of the noble guests. Answers had to be brief, respectful, and spoken in an even, quiet voice. Direct eye contact was considered impertinent, so her gaze had to be kept lowered at all times. The girl became a silent executor of another's will, devoid of her own opinion. Invisibility was also required when setting the table for grand dinner parties. Huge silver trays were carried with incredible ease, as if they weighed nothing. The arrangement of plates and crystal glasses was carried out with mathematical precision and without a single clink. Serving at the table resembled a complex ballet where everyone knew their part by heart. The guests enjoyed their meal, completely oblivious to the shadows flitting behind their backs. The maid's attire also helped them blend completely into the interior of the luxurious mansion. The dark fabrics of their dresses merged with the shadows in the corners of the rooms and narrow corridors. White aprons served only as a sign of cleanliness, without drawing undue attention to themselves. The absence of jewelry and the austere hairstyles made all the maids look alike. Individuality was deliberately erased so as not to distract the hosts from their important thoughts. The psychological pressure of having to remain invisible at all times was immense. The girls grew accustomed to holding their breath and walking on tiptoes, even during their rare moments of rest. This habit stayed with them for life, shaping a particular type of timid and quiet behavior. They learned to anticipate their employers' wishes before they even had a chance to voice them. True professionalism lay precisely in this intuitive understanding of others' needs. It's hard to imagine how much emotional strength such daily self-denial required. Life was spent in the shadow of others' splendor, with no right to recognition of their own merits. If you enjoy delving into these hidden details of the past, be sure to like this video. Guess how long it took to create this impeccably clean linens for the entire mansion? The laundry process in a Victorian home was a massive undertaking that took several full days. The laundry room was usually located in a separate outbuilding so that the smell of soap and dampness wouldn't seep into the formal halls. This process required incredible physical endurance and the coordinated work of several young women. Water was drawn from street hydrants and heated in huge copper cauldrons over an open fire. The washing began with a long soak of a pile of sheets, tablecloths, and clothes in a strong alkaline solution. The girls had to spend hours scrubbing heavy wet fabrics on hard wooden boards. The skin on their hands quickly became rough and cracked from constant contact with the harsh soap. Steam from the boiling water filled the cramped room, making it hard to breathe and creating an incredibly stifling atmosphere. The laundry had to be constantly turned over with heavy wooden tongs so that it would be cleaned evenly. The main wash was followed by the equally labor-intensive process of rinsing and wringing out the fabrics. Huge linen tablecloths absorbed so much water that it took 2 people working together to lift them. The laundry was wrung out by hand, which required enormous effort from the young workers. The fabrics were then rinsed in several changes of water until the water ran completely clear. To give the laundry a special whiteness, a special bleaching agent was added to the water, requiring precise measurement. Drying the laundry depended on the whims of the English weather and often turned into a real problem. On sunny days, the sheets were hung on long ropes in the mansion's courtyard. In winter, or when it rained, drying was moved to the kitchen or to special drying rooms with hot stoves. The wet fabrics hung from the ceiling, exuding a thick scent of damp linen and wood smoke. It was necessary to constantly ensure that the soot drifting from the stoves did not ruin the clean clothes. The next step was starching colours, cuffs, and formal table napkins. The starch was prepared according to special recipes, and its consistency had to be absolutely flawless. The fabrics were dipped into hot starch paste, after which they became as stiff as thin cardboard. A properly starched item was considered a sign of high status and the respectability of the entire household. The slightest error in proportions meant having to redo all this grueling work from scratch. Ironing was perhaps the most critical and dangerous stage of the entire laundry cycle. Irons were heated over an open flame or in special braziers to very high temperatures. The maid had to masterfully control the heat so as not to leave scorch marks on delicate batiste or silk. Heavy cast iron irons weighed several kilograms, and she had to swing them for 10 hours straight. Her back and shoulders ached unbearably from this endless, monotonous motion. Special attention was paid to ironing complex dresses with numerous ruffles, lace, and pleats. A special iron of a specific shape and size was used for each detail. The lace was smoothed out by hand, millimeter by millimeter, requiring incredible patience and precision. A single dress could take several hours to iron before it looked perfect. The laundress's work was akin to the craftsmanship of a jeweler, which forgives not even the slightest mistake. After ironing, the items were carefully sorted, folded, and stored in spacious linen closets. Each stack was layered with small bags of dried lavender to impart a delicate scent to the fabrics. The housekeeper inspected the order in the wardrobes with particular strictness and fastidiousness. The sheets had to lie in even rows, like stacks of immaculately white paper. Any carelessness in storage was severely punished by the loss of free time. This endless cycle of cleaning, repeated week after week, becoming a routine. The host's impeccable appearance depended directly on these exhausting days spent in the stuffy laundry room. Have you ever wondered how much hidden effort was required to maintain such order? In the next chapter, you'll learn how they coped with the harsh necessity of living in a cold attic. The attic of a Victorian mansion was a world of its own, hidden from prying eyes. It was a realm of drafts, low sloping ceilings, and perpetual twilight. The servants' quarters were located on the top floor, directly beneath a roof that was scorching in summer and freezing in winter. Small dormer windows let in a minimal amount of daylight, leaving the corners plunged into deep shadow. The sounds of music from the living rooms or the clinking of crystal from the formal dining room never reached this place. Space was used extremely sparingly, so the girls had to share a room between 2 or 3 of them. Narrow iron beds were placed right up against one another, leaving only a narrow passage in the middle. The mattresses were stuffed with cheap straw, which quickly compressed and began to poke through the thin fabric. Bedding was changed very rarely, as priority was always given to the owner's belongings. There was simply no personal space in these cramped little rooms. Heating in the attic was not included in the design, so in winter it was bitterly cold there. By morning, the water in the wash basins was covered with a thick crust of ice that had to be broken. The girls slept in woolen socks and wrapped themselves in old shawls to retain at least a little warmth. Their only salvation was bricks heated on the kitchen stove, which they took to bed with them. These harsh conditions were accepted as an inevitable part of the profession they had chosen. The room's furnishings consisted of the bare minimum of simple wooden items: a tiny chest of drawers for storing uniforms, a wobbly stool, and a small earthenware basin for washing. Mirrors were not allowed, so that the young workers would not waste time admiring their appearance. Clothes were hung on wooden pegs driven directly into the unevenly plastered wall. No interior decorations or paintings were permitted under the housekeeper's strict rules. The storage of personal belongings was strictly regulated and limited to a small chest under the bed. Inside lay a couple of letters from home, an old comb, and perhaps a spare pair of stockings. Owning books was not encouraged, as reading was considered a waste of precious time. Any illegal item found was confiscated without the right to return or discussion. The attic was meant to remain a place exclusively for brief and functional sleep. Social isolation on the top floor was felt particularly keenly on long winter evenings. The girls were forbidden to leave their rooms after lights out, wander the hallways, or go downstairs. They found themselves locked within four walls, alone with their fatigue and their own thoughts. Conversations were held in whispers so as not to attract the attention of the strict supervisor patrolling the floor. This isolation from the outside world made them completely dependent on the rhythm of the house. Sanitary conditions in the attic were extremely poor and required immense patience. The entire floor had only a few chamber pots, which the girls themselves carried out in the morning. A full bath was a rare luxury, available only once a week in the cold kitchen. Daily hygiene was limited to a quick wash with ice-cold water from a tiny basin. Maintaining personal cleanliness under such conditions was a true feat of self-discipline. During rare bouts of illness, the attic turned into a veritable place of isolation and quiet despair. A sick maid remained in bed, risking losing her job if the illness dragged on. Her friends secretly brought her leftovers from the kitchen, risking severe punishment. Doctors were rarely called for the servants, as people relied on cheap folk remedies. Health was these women's greatest asset, and losing it meant the collapse of their entire lives. Despite all the hardships, this cramped little room under the roof became their only home. Here they could finally take off their stiff, form-fitting corsets and stretch their legs, which were aching from the strain. In the darkness, to the sound of rain pounding on the tin roof, they dreamed of a better life. These brief hours of oblivion gave them the strength to wake up again at 4:30 in the morning. The attic held their secrets, their tears, and their quiet hopes for the future. This is what happens behind closed doors when the mistress is dissatisfied with something. The constant fear of dismissal hung over every maid like an invisible but incredibly heavy burden. In Victorian England, a worker dismissed without references found herself at the very bottom of society. Without a good letter of recommendation, it was absolutely impossible to get a new position in a respectable household. Therefore, the girls endured any nitpicking and harshness just to keep their precarious position. The list of rules, violation of which threatened immediate dismissal, was enormous. It was forbidden to engage in romantic relationships, receive guests, or even talk at length with messengers at the back door. The slightest suspicion of flirting with the footman led to immediate dismissal and having one's belongings thrown out onto the street. The employers demanded impeccable morality from the servants, surpassing even their own high standards. A personal life was an unaffordable luxury for those who had dedicated themselves to serving the mansion.
He'll be back soon.
Damaging the master's property was considered one of the most serious and unforgivable offences. A chipped crystal vase or delicate lace scorched by an iron cost more than a maid's annual salary. At best, the cost of the damaged item was deducted from her already meagre earnings for years. At worst, the girl was accused of deliberate sabotage and dismissed in disgrace that very day. Every movement among the expensive items was accompanied by a paralyzing fear of awkwardness. Insolence or arguments with the employers were suppressed with the utmost severity and resolve. The slightest expression of discontent or attempt to justify oneself was perceived as a rebellion against the established order. A maid was expected to listen silently to any accusations directed at her, even the most unjust ones. Submissiveness was valued above diligence, serving as the primary criterion for professional suitability. There was absolutely no say in this strictly hierarchical world. Theft, even the smallest, meant not only dismissal, but also immediate handover to the police. A piece of sugar hidden in a pocket or a scrap of expensive soap could lead to arrest. The owners regularly conducted inspections, counting the silverware and checking the supplies in the storerooms. Suspicion was the norm, and the presumption of guilt always worked against the hired staff. The atmosphere of mistrust forced the girls to watch not only themselves, but also their fellow workers. Being late from a rare day off could also serve as a compelling reason for dismissal. The young women were given half a day of freedom once a month, and they were required to return exactly at the appointed time. Delays due to bad weather or a broken-down carriage were not accepted as excuses. Punctuality was a symbol of loyalty to the household, and a breach of it was regarded as betrayal. A maid's time belonged to her only in name, always remaining the property of her employer. Illness that prevented the performance of duties often led to the swift and ruthless replacement of the worker. The household had to function flawlessly, and no one was going to wait for the junior maid to recover. The weak and infirm were quietly sent on their way, paid their wages for the days worked. Pity in such matters was considered inappropriate sentimentality that interfered with the proper running of the household. Health was the only guarantee of keeping a roof over one's head. Even one's appearance could be a cause for dissatisfaction with the strict and nitpicking housekeeper. A stray strand of hair, an unevenly tied apron, or worn-out shoes were seen as signs of laziness. Perfection was required in everything, from the shine of the scrubbed floors to the crisp starch of the uniforms. The girls constantly adjusted their aprons and checked their bonnets, fearing a sudden inspection. The house's perfect facade demanded a perfect facade from every servant. This constant pressure shaped a particular type of character, prone to anxiety and absolute submission. Do you consider such strict rules fair for the domestic workers of that era? In the next chapter, you will learn the whole truth about the complex hierarchy that existed within the domestic staff itself. The world beyond the front doors had its own incredibly complex and strict social ladder. At the very top of this pyramid stood the butler and the housekeeper, who wielded almost unlimited power. They decided matters of hiring, firing, assigning duties, and imposing fines on the junior staff. Their rooms were separate, furnished much more comfortably, and even heated in the winter. To the ordinary maids, they were as unattainable figures as the noble masters themselves. The butler was responsible for the wine cellar, the silverware, and the work of all the men in the house. He possessed impeccable manners, wore a formal suit, and had the authority to give orders to the footmen. The housekeeper ruled over the female servants, overseeing food consumption and the cleanliness of the linens. The bunch of keys jingling at her waist was a symbol of absolute control over all the pantries in the house. To contradict these two leaders meant certain loss of one's job. One rank below them were the ladies' personal maids and the gentlemen's valets. They had direct access to the owner's quarters and often enjoyed their special trust. The maids wore silk dresses, remade from the mistress's old gowns, and did not do any dirty work. They helped the ladies dress, did their elaborate hairstyles, and kept their little secrets. The rest of the servants looked upon them with envy and secret irritation because of their privileged position. The head cook reigned supreme in the kitchen, her word the law for the cooks and dishwashers. Her domain was the hottest and noisiest room in the mansion's spacious basement. She jealously guarded her recipes and could cause a massive scandal over a ruined sauce. The cook had the right to choose the ingredients herself at the market, which gave her a certain degree of financial freedom. Even the housekeeper preferred not to make any sharp remarks in her domain. Next came the senior and junior maids, on whose shoulders rested the bulk of the cleaning for the enormous house. The senior maid assigned work areas and checked the quality of the scrubbed floors. The junior maids performed the dirtiest tasks, cleaning fireplaces, carrying heavy buckets, and scrubbing the stairs. The difference in status between them was enormous and was emphasized even by the details of their strict uniforms. The junior maids were required to give way to their seniors and fulfill all their minor whims. At the very bottom of this complex system was the dishwasher, whose fate was the harshest. She spent her days elbow-deep in hot, greasy water, scrubbing heavy copper pans and pots. Her hands were always red and swollen, and her clothes were saturated with the lingering smell of kitchen waste. The dishwasher rarely ventured beyond her stuffy dungeon, remaining invisible even to the other servants. It was the dirtiest and lowest-paid job in a wealthy Victorian household. The hierarchy was strictly observed, even during brief shared meals in the servants' dining room. Seating was strictly based on seniority. The butler and the respected housekeeper took the first seats. Food was served in strict order, and the junior staff often received only the leftovers of the best dishes. Conversations at the table were permitted only with the permission of senior staff members. This constant emphasis on status ensured that no one forgot their place for even a second. Advancement to a higher rank was possible, but required many years of impeccable and arduous service. The dishwasher dreamed of becoming a junior maid, and the maid, in turn, hoped to rise to the position of senior maid. This career advancement was the sole motivation that compelled them to endure daily hardships. Each promotion was accompanied by a small raise in pay and an improvement in living conditions. However, only a handful of the most persistent and submissive managed to reach the top of this hierarchy. This complex management structure allowed the vast household to function without a hitch. It shifted the responsibility for oversight from the masters to the senior staff. The system worked flawlessly, transforming the crowd of hired workers into a single, well-oiled machine. A maid's uniform was not merely workwear, it served as a visible marker of her social status. The stiff cotton dresses were made of cheap but incredibly dense fabric, resistant to constant washing. They clung tightly to the figure, restricting movement and preventing her from breathing deeply. The dark color practically hid the soot and dust stains that were inevitable with such dirty work. In the summer, it was unbearably hot in such an outfit, and in the winter, the fabric offered no warmth at all in the drafts. An integral part of the outfit was a thick white apron covering the dress from the chest down to the knees. It had to remain spotlessly clean, which required constant care while performing tasks. The starched ties dug tightly into the waist, adding discomfort with every bend. Rough linen aprons were used for dirty morning cleaning, which were then changed for formal ones. Changing the apron symbolized the transition from dirty work to cleaner, daytime duties. A bonnet on the head was a mandatory accessory, concealing the hair and symbolizing submission to one's mistress. It was tightly fastened with pins, often causing a throbbing headache by the end of a long day. Hair had to be combed smoothly, without a single coquettish curl or loose strand. Removing the cap during working hours was considered a gross violation of the rules of propriety. It was a kind of crown of service, which the girls wore with submissive dignity. Shoes were rarely issued, and when they were usually rough, heavy boots with thick, stiff soles. They reliably protected the feet from the dampness in the basements, but they rubbed the skin terribly during long walks. The steps of the endless staircases wore down the soles, and the girls had to pay for shoe repairs out of their meager earnings. Walking silently in such clunky shoes was a true art requiring long practice. By evening, the pain in their feet had become a constant backdrop to the young worker's entire life. Household traditions demanded a complete renunciation of any personal jewelry or bright details in clothing. Ribbons, brooches, and rings were strictly forbidden so as not to distract attention from the noble interior. A maid was supposed to look neat but utterly faceless, as if she were part of the standard furnishings. Any attempt to express individuality was regarded as impermissible audacity and was suppressed. Beauty was a privilege reserved exclusively for the noble ladies residing on the grand floors. Manners were dictated by the equally strict traditions of Victorian class morality. Addressing one's masters always began with a respectful bow of the head and the utterance of their title. The words "yes, ma'am" and "yes, sir" became the most frequent phrases in a young woman's limited vocabulary. A calm, even tone of voice was maintained even in moments of extreme fatigue or undeserved hurt. Emotions were to be hidden as carefully as dust beneath luxurious Persian rugs. It was also traditional to deny servants the right to their own religious beliefs or political views. They were required to attend church with their employers, occupying the farthest, most modest pews. Sunday service was the only legal reason to leave the confines of the vast mansion. However, even there they were under the watchful eye of the housekeeper, who monitored their behavior. Spiritual life was also subject to a strict regimen established by the all-powerful employer. Many of these rules seem senselessly cruel today, but back then they were the norm. They shaped an obedient class of people willing to serve the comfort of others for a pittance. The weight of tradition was no less oppressive than a tight corset or long hours of work in the laundry. It was a system of absolute suppression, elevated to the status of virtue and English manners. The girls accepted these rules of the game, unaware that the world outside the window could be arranged differently. Gradually, the uniform became a second skin, and the strict traditions the only possible way of thinking. A young girl was transformed into the ideal maid, completely devoid of her own ambitions. The enormous Victorian mansion was a remarkable example of the coexistence of two completely different worlds. Upstairs were light-filled drawing rooms, adorned with gilding, velvet, and exquisite paintings. The air here smelled of expensive cigars, fresh flowers from the greenhouse, and delicate French perfumes. Time flowed slowly, measured by formal dinners, afternoon tea, and leisurely conversations. This world was created for pleasure, comfort, and the display of high social status. Directly beneath them, hidden by thick floors, the gloomy and noisy world of the domestic staff bustled. The basements were lit by dim gas, and the walls here were made of rough, unpainted brick. The air was saturated with the smells of fried onions, dampness, laundry soap, and coal dust. Time here flew by at an incredible speed, breaking down into the minutes needed to carry out urgent tasks. This underworld was the engine room of a luxurious ship, ensuring its smooth sailing. The masters moved along wide, grand staircases, carpeted with soft rugs that muffled the sound of footsteps. They were surrounded by tall windows, stuccoed ceilings, and bronze railings polished to a shine. The servants, however, used narrow spiral ladders hidden in dark niches behind wall panels. These passageways were cramped, steep, and often lacked proper daylight. The physical division of space underscored the insurmountable chasm between the two social classes. Even the soundscape in these two dimensions differed radically from one another. Upstairs, classical music played, accompanied by quiet laughter and the clinking of the finest Chinese porcelain. Downstairs, there was the clatter of heavy pots, the cook's sharp shouts, and the constant noise of boiling water. The bell system was the only thread connecting these two worlds into a single whole. A sharp ring shattered the silence of the basement, causing an invisible mechanism to spring into action immediately. The owners of the house could live their entire lives without knowing the layout of their own basements and attics. They took the warmth of the fireplace and the clean sheets for granted as a natural part of their environment. For the maids, however, every stoked stove and washed plate was measured in physical effort expended. They knew the inside story of every luxurious item, the weight of a silver tray, the difficulty of cleaning a velvet armchair. The beauty of the upper world was created by the calluses and sweat of the inhabitants of the lower world. The contact between these worlds took place according to strict rules and only at the initiative of the masters. A maid would appear in the parlor like a ghost, perform her task, and immediately vanish into the shadows. Conversations between the masters and the servants were functional, devoid of any emotional warmth. Knowing the names and life circumstances of the junior maids was considered beneath the dignity of an aristocrat. They remained convenient functions, devoid of human traits and personal stories. This contrast was the essence of Victorian society, its primary and most carefully concealed secret. The luxury of some existed solely thanks to the grueling labor and invisibility of others. Two universes functioned within a single building, governed by entirely different laws of physics and morality. The upper world consumed energy, the lower world generated it at the expense of its own health. It was the ideal division of labor, elevated to an absolute. None of the inhabitants of the upper floors wanted to think about the price of their impeccable comfort. The girls from the attic, for their part, accepted this state of affairs as the unshakable will of fate. The boundary between the worlds seemed to them as solid as the brick walls of the mansion itself. This young girl's story was just one of hundreds of thousands of similar fates across England. Every year, crowds of young female workers left the villages to disappear into the vast city mansions. They became the very invisible foundation upon which the grandeur of the Victorian Empire was built. Without their daily, grueling labor, the life of the aristocracy would have ground to a halt in a matter of days. They were the circulatory system of these luxurious homes, ensuring their breadth and impeccable cleanliness. After several years of hard service, not a trace remained of the once timid girl. She had transformed into a silent, professional maid with calloused hands and a straight back. Her movements became automatic, precise, and devoid of unnecessary fuss. Illusions faded, giving way to a pragmatic understanding of the harsh laws of survival in a stranger's home. This transformation was the inevitable price for a piece of bread and a place under a leaky roof. Until the end of their days, these women kept the layout of vast, unfamiliar mansions etched in their memory. They remembered the number of steps on the black staircases and the creak of floorboards in distant hallways. Their own lives often remained unlived, sacrificed for the comfort and status of others. Many never started families of their own, remaining forever devoted servants to their wealthy masters. It was an era of staggering inequality, hidden behind elegant facades and polite smiles. Today, these enormous houses have been turned into museums, stunning tourists with their splendor. While marveling at the wood carvings and crystal chandeliers, people rarely think about those who polished them to a shine. History prefers to preserve the names of the owners, erasing from memory the names of those who tended the fires for them. But it was precisely these silent workers who created that very ideal image of the Victorian era. Their hard labor deserves no less respect than the architectural masterpieces of that time. Through the mists of time, we can only try to imagine the burden of their endless daily chores. They have faded into the shadows, leaving behind perfectly ironed lace and polished antique silver. What other hidden stories about daily life in the past would you like to see in our next videos? Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new, fascinating historical investigations.